Hi, folks. I am beaming into you from a hotel room in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm going to be giving a lecture here later today. I wasn't sure what was going to happen for Friday morning, but I discovered yesterday when I was in transit. I already knew that Annie has a previous commitment, my partner in crime, but I discovered that Claire also was not going to be in on Friday morning. So that means it would be very hard for us to do something Friday morning, even if I could figure out how to do it from Missouri. So instead, I'm going to do a brief pre recorded episode here for you. It's not like there's a shortage of things to talk about, is there? I want to address one thing in particular. I wish that actually we could have a normal episode because I would so love to engage in conversation with you, and I'm sure you're feeling the need for conversation too. Next week, folks, we will be there. But for this week, what I want to talk about is something. Obviously, it's Signalgate, but I want to talk about that in a very specific way. Um, I People are talking about, and for those of you who have not been keeping up with the news, there was an attack planned on Yemen, and it was entirely, the conversation about it was entirely conducted on Signal, which is private. It's not a private meaning personal. It's not a formal government channel. And there was an Atlantic magazine reporter who was in on that conversation and then reported it. And there was a lot of claims being made by the administration. Oh, it wasn't classified. Oh, he hacked his way, the reporter hacked his way in, whatever. I'm not going to go into all of the detail. But what it appears is that in some way or another, not through hacking, a reporter ended up being in that conversation, invited or not. He was there, and it was classified information. I mean, it was information surely that is not supposed to be out in the public. And it was being conducted on Signal. And the significant thing to know about Signal is not only is it not like a formal government channel in which things are recorded and kept, but it erases, like you can time it so whatever happens on there gets vanished into Neverland, right? That it gets erased, it gets deleted. The thing that I want to address is that the conversation, at least what I've seen thus far, and admittedly I've been in transit, so I have not been totally monitoring what people are saying about this, but from what I can see, the conversation has been largely centered on incompetence. Look how incompetent they are. These people don't deserve their jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not going to say whether that's true or false. I just want to touch on another thread here, which, as history-minded people, is an important thread. And that is, regardless of whether it was incompetence or not, the fact of the matter is that whatever was going on Signal was not being recorded in a normal way as a government record of government action, right? The sorts of things that there are rules for, the kinds of documents or recordings that get submitted to, for example, the National Archives, right? What was going on was something that will not really, as far as I know, leave a paper trail. Now, I won't say why people might not want to leave a paper trail. I'll leave that for you to consider. But the reason why that's not normal, the reason why that's not typically what the government does, is because the paper trail is the government, right? The government leaves a paper trail as a record of what it has done and what it is. And that paper trail is accountability as well as the historical record. If you want to hold the government accountable for what it is doing, or people in the government, presidents and others, for what they have done, you need a paper trail. That's what the paper trail is for. That's what the National Archives, in part, is for, is to keep a record of what the government does. And those records, and this conversation already went on concerning boxes of records in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, but the fact of the matter is, those records are ours, the American people's. They are a record of our government, our public servants, the people who work for us. So the part of this whole fiasco that I wanted to touch on here this morning is the fact that this is an attempt to evade accountability, to evade the historical record, and to hit on the fact that the historical record is how we know, the record, formal documents, things that are cataloged and kept in archives. These are the things that enable us to know what our government is doing. So, in addition to the fact that national security certainly doesn't seem to have been paid much attention to here, in addition to the fact that I believe journalists in Germany have beamed in and found a variety of different things about the people who were part of that Signal chat, in addition to all of the things that I'm sure there are countless more that have happened between when I got to Missouri yesterday and this moment this morning. But in addition to all of that, which is all important, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that what was going on there was an attempt to leave no record behind. Right? And the record is ours. The record is how we know what our government is doing. And that's why there are so many rules, and regulations about the record. Remember during Trump's first presidency when he tended to rip things up or destroy things, and people were taking them and taping them back together again because there are regulations and rules and laws that have something to do with the record, the government record, the formal government record. The things that, among other things, in past times, the things that historians used to understand what happened, but now, in the current time, the things that reporters and the public need to understand what's happening. And I can't stress enough the fact that that record is ours, in the same way that the government is ours. And the people who we give power to, they're accountable to us. So remember, folks, that some of what we're seeing going on here, there are many dimensions of problem, right? The problematic dimensions of what we're seeing now is vast. But the one that I didn't want to escape from people's notice is that this whole way of doing things on Signal with a conversation that gets deleted is that accountability is being denied. Accountability for what's being done now, accountability to the American people, accountability for the record, something to go into the National Archives. I remember many, many, many moons ago when I was employed by the Library of Congress, and I sat in on a meeting in the manuscript division, and this was a long time ago, and the conversation was along the lines of, there was a time when we, the manuscript division, collecting the things for congressional things, right, Library of Congress, collecting congressional matters and archiving what members of Congress did, there was a lot of paper for us to collect. Nowadays, with email, right, we don't even have like those little pink slips that said while you were out, right, and you record people who called on the phone. Nowadays with email, again, this was 1,000 years ago, what are we collecting? What record are we collecting of what Congress is doing? And this was a conversation went on for a while. I don't have the answer to that question, but it was a very real, pressing conversation. As the record of Congress, the Library of Congress, we are holding the papers of members of Congress. What are we collecting to make up the record of what they do? Very real conversation, right? How do we keep track of what they're doing in our archive? So now we're getting at this in another deliberate way, in a way that is denying the record, denying the archive of a record of what's going on, and thus making accountability impossible. I will also remind you of the fact that President Trump fired the archivist, the National Archivist, right, the person who runs the National Archives, fired that person early on. And I believe Marco Rubio is the acting archivist now at the National Archives, the chief archivist. And that too may fly under people's radar screens. But again, what we're talking about here is the record of what's going on, the record of what the government is doing, the way that we, the American people, and journalists and reporters and anybody else who has permission to see those records can understand what the government is doing. The government is ours. The record is ours. The archive is holding them for us. And I've said 1,000 times that we live in a crisis of accountability. It's been going on for years, but this is an important aspect of it. In addition to incompetence and everything else, accountability is being denied here. And you have to assume that this is not a lone example. So you have to assume, on a certain level, there's a lot of accountability being denied. Looking ahead in time, right? Who knows? But the people who are doing this are thinking, well, this will be handy because we won't really be operating where people can see us, and we won't leave much of a record behind. That's important. I don't know when I began this, actually. I just started when I started. So I don't know how many minutes this is or how long I've been speaking for. And I do have to run to get ready for the talk that I have to give later. But before I run, I at least wanted to make this point because it's historians and history teachers who are going to be probably the first to think about the historical record and what it means and the accountability that does not exist if we do not have the records and if we are not following the formal procedures and laws and rules and regulations as to what should be happening with government documents. They exist for a reason because accountability is the essence of democracy. And without those records, you can't really have full accountability. So I'm going to end there with that rather dramatic statement. I want to thank you all for beaming in for the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning, even if this isn't a conversation. I really, really don't have a mug this time. I mean, I really don't at all. Like I can't even pretend. So it's going to be mugless. And I have a bottle of water, but I don't particularly want to advertise the bottle of water, and I don't see mugs. So at any rate, my apologies for having a mugless. I know if we were together, mug would be on the bottom of the screen, and I would be feeling even more at a loss. But at any rate, thank you for beaming in, folks. Save up your questions because there's going to be so much to talk about next week. I can promise you that. The problem will be picking and choosing. Stay safe. Have a good week. And I will see you guys in a week's time. Bye, folks.